Howdy do, neighbor. It's Berean Spirits time once again. The boys have gathered around and they're ready for you. So join in, make comments, and study with the guys as they try to study as the Bereans did in Acts chapter 17. And now, here's the guys.
That's right, folks. We're back for another week of Berean Spirits here on social media, podcast, all of the places you want to get some great information. As long as you listen to Berean Spirits, you're going to get it. My name is Chris Peltz. I'm the evangelist with the Southside Church of Christ here in beautiful, rainy Springfield, Missouri. We've got Josh Thornhill with the Westside Church of Christ, as always, up in Wichita, Kansas. How you doing, Josh?
Hey. Enjoying some good rain. Yeah. It's wet outside, which I like. So it's a good day.
Right. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Richard Dotson with the Kearney Church of Christ up in Kearney, Missouri. How you doing, bro?
Got a question for you.
Oh, boy.
I used to play golf years ago. In fact, for 20 years, my clubs have been in my garage. 2 sets. I was an avid golfer. And I would break 80. I mean, when I quit, I was breaking 80. So the question's this. I played once in 20 years. So I'm getting ready to go play again. Do you think I can break 100?
You'll break something.
Oh, that's true. And I'm not going to play 18. I don't have enough love to play 18. It's only going to be 9. So the question is, can I break 50?
No.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think you can.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think for your first time, you're going to be excited because it's been so long. It's going to be a great game. Now, if you were to do a second game, like another day of it, it'd be terrible. First of all, you'd be sore. You'd be, but I think you're going to be fresh and you're going to knock it out of the park, man. You're going to do great.
I bet he's only going to have one because he'll swing and then hurt his back and then he'll be there moaning like a little baby.
Now listen, I got a 5-gallon bucket of golf balls that I hit into the woods over here behind my house. So, I mean, I can still hit a ball because every once in a while, in 20 years, I've been hitting balls out in the woods. So it isn't like I can't hit a ball. It's the short game that, I haven't messed with. So
I tell you what we need to do is get Josh and Ryan out there with you. And every time you hit a ball, they've got a shotgun and they got to shoot the ball.
I was thinking maybe we can just have them go fetch the ball.
No, that's okay.
Well, if they miss it, yeah, they got to go get it. There you go. That'd be great. All right. Well, folks, let's get into our topic today. Does God need your money? And just
I don't know if he does,
but
I need your money.
You need. That's right.
Yeah. Send me your money.
That's right, man. I hear all these stories. People were like, "Oh yeah, they pass a plate, and for somehow that preacher must have known what was or wasn't in there, and he asked when he's preaching, let's pass that plate again." That plate again. That's good.
That's amazing.
What a lie.
It's amazing how the preacher always has a sense for that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Y'all need to dig deeper into your hearts.
That's well, I tell you what, that might be one of the only true statements they'd ever make right there. Is digging deeper in your heart, because that's what it comes down to. And ultimately, and very quickly, just the short answer to that question is no. But if that's the question that you're asking, or if you think, I wonder, that's a great question. Well, no, it's not. I think it makes the point that we're going to be getting into today. But if that's the question we're asking ourselves, then there's another problem that we have between us and God, between us and faith, and between us and the truth. And it's a heart problem, when we'll certainly get into that. As we get into the scriptures, though, the Old Testament, going all the way back to the Old Testament, there were all types of offerings that were made, from animal sacrifices to grain offerings, to money collections that were given up, right? Gold and silver and various things. And there's a few things I think that are interesting in the Old Testament. Deuteronomy 14, for example, in verses 22 and 23, it talks about the tithing and what the purpose of tithing was. The purpose of tithing was to teach fear. It wasn't about God getting the 10%. It was about an understanding and a dedication, a heart that was right, and a heart that feared or revered God. And it taught that. And so it wasn't that God needed that from you. God needs nothing from us, but what he wants, what he desires. And what we desire and want is something that I think is really gets more to the heart of this particular question. And so, and Richard, today, I think I started with Josh last week. So, Richard, today, as we look at this particular topic, does God need your money? This is something that, really is something that we should examine ourselves and see exactly what type of offering the scriptures want, both in the Old and New Testament. It was there were free will offerings, and I think that gets kind of to the heart of where we need to start, perhaps.
Yeah, the whole the point of this is because I have come across a lot of Christians, even preachers, who feel like they don't have to give when the plates passed on Sunday. If they make some type of determination on their own that the church doesn't need the money, and there've been some things written about that as well. And so that was the whole thing that got even me thinking about this, and wanting to do this particular topic. Um, we even had somebody at church that asked me about it because they were sending their money when they were with a bigger church. They had make the determination that the church he was attending did not need the money. They had all the money they needed. So he was sending his offering to a smaller church that he thought needed the money. And so I thought, this is really something that there needs to be some teaching on this. And when you consider the question itself, now that's just the title. Does God need my money? The reason I titled it that way is because that's kind of the way it was phrased to me. And I think Chris answered right. No, God doesn't need our money. What we have to understand is that this is a spiritual exercise that's been given to us. It's an honor that God has given us to be a partaker in his work. And I think we see that in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, when it talks about the Macedonians and how they had implored Paul in 2 Corinthians 8:4. He implored them with much urgency that they would be able to fellowship this work to minister to the saints. And when you consider that, and then of course what is also stated in Philippians chapter 4, that this is considered a fruit that is applied to your spiritual account when you give to such works, then we have to understand then that this is something we should want to do, and it's an honor to be able to partake in it, and we shouldn't be trying to find a way to justify keeping the extra coins in our pocket. But I think Chris is right in going to the Old Testament to compare, because there is a comparison I think that is made between the Old Testament priest and what they did in offering their sacrifices that the people gave them, the burnt offerings and such. There was a way in which that was to be done, and they had to follow the rules. And when you think about the sacrifice that we're giving when we, uh, give to the Lord, that's also a sacrifice. And 2 Peter 2:9 says we're a royal priesthood. So, I can see the correlation where if a priest, a Levitical priest, had to be very careful, how he offered up those sacrifices to the Lord. We need to be very careful that we follow the same. And we're talking about authority. We're talking about looking at what God commanded and accepting his authority and following the rules. As 1 Peter 2:5 says, spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. And so, with that, yes, I do think that we have to be very careful with our giving and consider what we're doing and know what we're doing when we do give it.
Yeah, you keep saying Second Peter. I was thinking that was First Peter, but anyway,
You're right. You're right. You're right. Hey, it's one of those two.
One of those Peters.
If
Peter-
it's not
Peter
if
wrote
it's
it.
not in if it's not in Second Peter, go to First Peter.
that's right.
You know, just by process of elimination, you got to know what I'm thinking, not what I'm saying.
It's right. One of the great dad phrases of
That's
All
how I
right,
do my golf scorecard, by the way. That's how I was able to break 80. It wasn't that I remembered every shot. I just put down the ones I remembered.
There you go. Oh man, Josh, when you get to this idea of God and what he needs from us as opposed to what he wants from us, there's just a plethora of passages that talk about the heart and where our focus needs to be. And again, the Old Testament, Leviticus chapter 1, and throughout Leviticus, even in all of that, it talks about free will offerings. And the New Testament talks about free will offerings, giving freely, as we've prospered. We look at that would govern, but ultimately it really comes down to the heart more than anything else, right?
Exactly. And that's part of what God has wanted from the very beginning is the heart of his people. Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment in the law? And it's to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. Second is like it, and they love your neighbor as yourself. So God has never been interested in going through the motions. You can find that in Isaiah chapter 1, in Malachi, where Israel is offering sacrifices, but God says it's worthless to me because the heart is absent from it, and you're offering leftovers and such. So God has always been after the heart. And when it comes to our offering, it is an offering that comes from the heart as well. Again, like we've all discussed, or you've all discussed, God doesn't need our money. We're not giving so that God can just sit there and like Uncle Scrooge and just count all his money. He doesn't receive it, nor could he use it even. But God does call upon us to give so that his work can be accomplished. You think about, I think we've already referenced the Israelites giving to build the tabernacle. He required them to give so that his work could be accomplished. And the same thing is true in the New Testament. That's the only means that we have been given for raising funds to do the work that God has given us to do. It's the free will offering of its members, the church's members. And we're talking locally, by the way, in that context. But it still is an offering that is to be done out of your own heart. We find in Rome or 2 Corinthians chapter 9, Paul is dealing with this collection that is being made so that the church can help the needy saints in Jerusalem. And he says, beginning in verse 6, this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows with blessing will also reap with blessing. Each one must do just as he has purposed in his heart, not grudgingly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And then he's going to go on to say that God is going to make every grace abound to you, so that in everything at every time, having every sufficiency, you may have an abundance for every good work. I think the point there is, when you have that heart to give, when you have that heart to sacrifice of yourself in order to give for the Lord's purposes, he will bless you so that you can always have something with which to give, so that the Lord's work can continue. So again, that just shows the purpose, or our purpose behind what it is that we're doing, laying something aside, as he would say in 1 Corinthians 16. But it's not, I have to give this because God really needs my money. It's, I'm giving back to the Lord for his work, a portion of what he has blessed me with. And so the heart, of course, is the underlying issue there. And so certainly that's what God is most concerned with.
Yeah, we've got to get our hearts right. And it's interesting in all the issues and problems that the Israelites had when they left Egypt and were going towards the promised land. Exodus 35, when they were to give in order to make all the things for the tabernacle, and it says very clearly it was a free will offering to bring, their silver and gold and all these things to accomplish, all the elements that they were making for the tabernacle. And it's interesting in Leviticus or Exodus 36, verse 6, they had given so much that Moses finally had to come and say, "Stop!" Right? No, don't. We're good. We're good. But the point is that as many, as much as the Israelites were messing up, we're hungry, let's go back to Egypt, do all that. There was a time, and there were these little glimpses of this people that desired to serve God and to do things for God and had the right heart towards God. And when we come to the New Testament, while God doesn't need our money, he does care about our giving. And I think that's noticed in Mark chapter 12. Because in Mark chapter 12, Jesus was in the temple, and what was he doing? He was watching. He was watching what people were giving. And then he made a point as far as the widow who gave 2 mites and how she gave so much more than those who were putting in a bunch of money, because they were giving of their abundance and she was giving of her necessity, of her livelihood. She was truly sacrificing and going without in order to give, what she gave. But that goes to show the heart of the people and how God considered that to be a greater gift. So it wasn't about the amount, right? It was what she was willing to do and where her heart was at, which is why he says that we are to give free will offerings from the heart, and that not to do it grudgingly. Because Richard, if you have an opportunity to give, let's say $100 or $200, right? And another person in the same situation has an opportunity to give, one or the other, 100 or 200, right? You can give $200 begrudgingly. Another person can give $100 freely and happily. Who's God going to be pleased with? The one who gave the 200 or the 100?
He's going to be the
100.
one. Yeah, the one who followed the instructions.
Yeah, because it wasn't begrudgingly, right? It was from the heart and willingly and wantingly given, rather than, if you're going to be begrudging about what you're giving, you might as well just keep it. But the thing is, we shouldn't be begrudging, right? We shouldn't be having that attitude of, oh man, I have to do this, I have to do that. It should be a desire of wanting to, even regardless of what God has commanded. Our approach should never be, we have to do this. It should be a wanting and desire. God desires this. I want to do this for the Lord. I want to do this, because even in First Samuel, Richard, when Saul had brought back all that stuff from the Amalekites and was going to offer it as sacrifice, Samuel told him it is better to obey than to sacrifice.
Yeah, thinking about when you were talking, I was thinking about Jesus. I mean, he prayed to the Lord the night he was betrayed, and he prayed that this cup would pass from him, but he said, "Let not my will be done, but thy will be done." And if we're going to call ourselves Christians, then that has to be, that has to be our theme, I guess, is let not my will be done, but your will be done. And so when we're thinking about our offering, we have to know the Lord's will. Absolutely, we have to know the Lord's will, but then we have to follow it.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. And when you go to Hebrews 10, for example, while it doesn't so much talk about our offering, our giving, although it does talk about animal sacrifices that, doesn't take away sin, but Christ came and offered himself. In verses 19 through 24, really through verse 22, I guess, it talks about having our hearts sprinkled and our bodies washed with pure water, and having our hearts right? Focusing on others, focusing on worshiping God, focusing on him. But it's all about a matter of the heart and what, where our heart is. Are we covetous? Are we carnal? Are we worldly? Are we all about, possessions and having things? Or, is our focus first and foremost, on God and his work and his labor in the salvation of souls? Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, having a spiritual focus is the key. I mean, we have a good comment from Chris Kramer here saying how disappointing it is to give a couple of leftover dollars to God and then go spend $50 on lunch. That indicates a mix up in priority. It's not seeking first the kingdom of God, because like we find in 1 Corinthians 16, this offering is something that is purposed in our hearts. It's not intended to be, I open up on my wallet on Sunday morning and, well, I got $20, so that's what I'll throw in there. It is an intentional purposing to give back to God a portion of what he's blessed us with. And that's part of stewarding our money well as well. We are, and I think part of this is we want to recognize that we are stewards of all the things that we've been given. We've been blessed with whatever it is that we have in order to be a good steward of it. And part of stewarding it well is to ensure that God receives what he is due with what we are given to manage. And so it is not something that should be, decided on Sunday morning when you happen to see what's left in your wallet. It's something that is to be planned out, and it's something that is to be an expression of our love and devotion for God as we decide what it is that we want to give him. It's really something that should be begun at the beginning of the month when we're planning out our financial goals for the month.
One of the things.
Can I interject?
Yeah.
I think it's, Chris, you and I recently had a conversation about how everybody has different difficulties. And for some people, money is a difficulty. And I'm talking about being tight, being extremely tight. And there are those, I guess you could say, for them to follow the Lord's instructions in giving, they might only give you 20 cents. I mean, let's just say that They may have $100 in their wallet and they may put 20 cents in the collection plate, but they may have purposed that in their heart and they may be cheerful. Now, would that be better than to put $50 in the plate and not be cheerful? You see my point? I mean, I think that's pretty low amount myself. But having said that, I'm not going to judge what somebody else gives. And I do think that there is a spiritual growth that takes place with people. And for some people, giving is something they have to grow at. And, so I'm not going to sit there and say, if somebody gives a low amount that they're doing it wrong. If they're giving it cheerfully, and if that's what they purpose in their heart, okay. And I hope they're going to grow spiritually to where they're willing to give more of themselves. But I mean, everybody has to start somewhere. And so I don't think we should be in a position to judge how much somebody's giving. That's the only thing I wanted to add.
Yeah, sure. No, one of the things, let's get back to the question at hand, right? The title of the show, does God need your money? And let's approach this from our own perspective, right? How many of us, right, don't have more than we need, right? I know there's a few. I know there are some that that are on very limited and tight budgets. I know that it happens, right? But we live, especially in this country, very wealthy, right? I mean, what we have an abundance. We are well beyond our needs being met, right? And so just to have that base, that question about what God needs, sometimes I think if we were really to sit back and think about that, does God need this? Right? What if that was the basis of what we had? Right? If it's only what we need, a lot of us we wouldn't like that very much. We wouldn't like that approach for somebody to say, well, if you don't need it, so you're not going to get it, right? And so that's kind of where we are sometimes with God, is thinking, why are we asking, does God need this? It comes down to, again, a heart problem. But I think what we need to do is we need to address, some of the things that people are trying to say. Listen, we don't have to give if there's not a need. We don't have to give because 1 Corinthians 16 is for a specific issue in the first century in Jerusalem and nothing else. I'd like to address that a little bit as well. And then there's a couple of other things I want to get to as well. Is that all right with you guys? Go ahead.
Well, go ahead, Josh.
Well, I was just going to add real quick. We talk about like the people that want to make the argument that the collection was only for a need. As long as we still have preachers that need to be supported for the preaching of the gospel, there's a need. Until we have every gospel preacher who's standing up in the pulpits having met sufficiently all the need that they have, there is a need for giving. And so, and there's preachers out there that still need support. So, my point is there's always going to be a need, because we have preachers that need to be supported in addition to the other work that God has given the church to do. So I don't think that that's absolutely a valid argument that it's only based upon need.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I can add to that, when we're talking about giving, we always go to 1 Corinthians 16 to show why we pass the plate on Sundays. And so when you start this, Chris, I do want to emphasize verse 1. And I can't make light of that, because every time I see this word used, it draws my attention. And it says, concerning the collection for the saints, as I've given orders to the churches of Galatia, so you must do also. Must do. This is something he's telling Christians at the church at Corinth they must do. So before we start making judgments about a need or whatever, about a reason not to, we better emphasize to ourselves, this is something the Lord is saying we must do. This is an obligation that has to be met.
That's right. And so right now I want to address some context. First of all, in chapter 16 of 1 Corinthians, because the idea that this is a collection only for what was taking place in Jerusalem and the needy saints in Jerusalem, it falls apart in the context, because yes, they were taking up a collection upon every first day of the week, and there was a need that was going to be met with some of those funds in Jerusalem that we'll get to. But there were other things in the very same context that the church in Corinth was providing for. Verse 6, for example, they were going to provide for. The word there, and Josh, you can help me there in verse 6 and verse 11, where it talks about Paul and then Timothy. Trying to think of how it's where it send them on their way. Is that
send me on my journey?
Send me on my way wherever I go. Yeah.
Yeah, and then that's verse 6 and verse 11. I think the same thing with Timothy. Literally, though, you look at that word, it is provide. It is to give, to aid, right, them on their journey. It isn't just a farewell, good luck, good handshake, kiss on the cheek and a hug and see you later, right? It was a provide for them, aid them on their way. And they did that in verse 6. They did that in verse 11. He told them to do it for Timothy in verse 11. And then he thanks them in verses 15 through 17, for helping him where he was at. And then you go to chapter 9 of 2 Corinthians. And Josh, you read some of this earlier, and it talks about their abundance for every good work. Mm-hmm. And in verse 12, he also says that it's not only for the needs, for the needy saints, right? Providing for them, right? There was more to it than that. And as they were taking up a collection, he says to then, right, in that same context there in 2 Corinthians, to, when he comes or whoever he sends ahead, right, get together what you have decided as a church to send to Jerusalem, right? Get your gift ready, right? What you've determined to give. Wait a minute. What decision is there if everything that was being given on the first day of the week was to go to them? There's no choice. There's no decision to be made or amount to be considered. All of it is supposed to go according to what many people are trying to say today. And yet that is not what Paul points out in 2 Corinthians chapter 9. And so, they want to scream context, and yet they don't want to look at the entirety of the context from 1 Corinthians 16 and 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and chapter 9. Go ahead, guys.
Well, I'm thinking about Samuel and Eli and his two sons who were taking the best of the offerings that were sent. And they were supposed to be sacrificing to the Lord, but they were taking of the best parts. And I've often wondered this: would the people have been excused to offer, the worst of their flock, if they knew that it's just going to Eli's sons and they're going to take, they're going to take the best pieces. So we don't have to offer the best to the Lord. It's not going to get to the Lord. Eli's sons are taking it. So let's just give them the worst of the flock. I can't help but think that God would have been upset with them because they're violating, what they were supposed to be doing. I said, in 1 Corinthians 16, that this is something we must do. And when we come to our sacrifices that we seen make by the Jews in the Old Testament, that was something they had to do. And we as priests in the New Testament, we have to look at that and understand that there is a comparison being made between a priest in the Old Testament and a priest in the New Testament. I think that's what Hebrews chapter 9 is showing. And we have to follow the same instructions to the letter that the people were given in their sacrifices to the Lord in the Old Testament. And so just because somebody could look at that and say, well, I don't trust the elders on how they're going to use the money, or I don't trust that the elders need the money, or I don't, this is not for something that's specific, as you were saying, Chris, and by the way, if that's specific, then the only people we can give to are needy saints in Jerusalem, by the way. If there's no application to be made, then we might as well just get rid of all the collection, because the only people we can give to are needy saints in Jerusalem.
That's what they're trying to do.
If that's a specific example. But my point being, getting back to that point, is that it's not up for us to think about how our offering is going to be used. We have to give our offering as the Lord commanded. Now, there may be abuses on how that offering is used, like with Eli's sons. There may be abuses, but there is a way to deal with that. I mean, that's a separate issue from my giving. And so if elders, for instance, use the money in an unscriptural way, there is a way in which the church is to rebuke them before everybody. But be that as it may, that doesn't mean my offering to the Lord was wrong. If I followed it correctly, that the errors on their part. And so I can't sit there and try to look past it and say, I don't have to give because the elders aren't going to use the money right, or the elders don't need the money, and that's something else. Mm-hmm. If I can go there.
Well, that's what I wanted to say, is it doesn't necessarily mean that there's unauthorized use.
Yeah. I mean, who are we to say the elders don't need the money? The Lord, I mean, first of all, and some of these people have said there's no example of a treasury. Well, I mean, they had to put the money somewhere till Paul came and got it. I mean, that's what he said. Do this, until I come. There had to be a place. So it's inferred there was a treasury, but be that as it may, there has to be a way in which, we can separate between our giving and what the elders are doing with it, and not see that they're, I don't make my decision on giving based on what the elders are doing. If I got a problem with what the elders are doing, or, if I think we even have enough money, then I got to put my faith in the Lord, because the Lord may have plans. There may be an opportunity he's going to present to the church. And that's why we need to be prepared for that, so that we can partake in it. So I don't know if I worded that all correctly, but.
Well, one of the things I think we run into is people, rather than submitting to elders, right? They're determining basically to become their own, their own guide when it comes to, how their money is used, and I think a lot of times it's with good intentions. I'm not doubting the intentions, not impugning the motives of people. I think sometimes it's misguided, because they look at a situation that maybe they don't completely understand, and they make determinations and go outside of a personal responsibility. We have a responsibility to the work where we are at, right? And that is an offering, because that is worship. That's another thing I think we need to understand, is that when we give, it is an act of worship. This isn't just something that we're throwing money at, opening up our wallet or checkbook one more time. This is an act of worship that we are engaged in, and we're determining what it is from our heart that we're going to give as we've prospered. And so we have that responsibility and command to do that very thing. Now, we also see that, yes, we don't give every little bit that we have, because we have examples in Ephesians chapter 4, for example, to work and labor so that, don't steal anymore, but work and labor with your own hands so that you can help those who, who have need, right? An individual responsibility to help your neighbor to be able to do those things. In Acts chapter 5 with Ananias and Sapphira, here they were, lying about what they gave. And Peter points out, why you had it. Was it not yours? Is this not your money? You can do with what you want. That's fine. The problem is their heart wasn't right. They lied about what they gave for personal prominence, right? For the way people would look at them, and a good pat on the back. And that's not what this is about. And so, first of all, we need to take note of the responsibility we have for the congregation we're a part of. We need to make sure that we are taken care of and are a part of that act of worship where we are at. And then, right, if there's other things that we can do, that's fine, but don't neglect that role that you have as a member of a local congregation. Josh?
Wait a minute, Chris.
Yeah.
Philippians 4:18. You talked about it being worship.
Yeah.
They're giving to Paul, the Philippians. He said this about it. Indeed, Philippians 4:18. Indeed, I have all and abound. I am full, having received from Epaphroditus the things sent from you, a sweet smelling aroma, an acceptable sacrifice, well pleasing to God. I mean, that sounds like worship to me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Josh, go ahead.
Certainly. I've been doing a series on authority and just kind of laying some of the basic foundations. And lately I've been trying to apply those principles in terms of the church itself. And I'm not entirely sure where I'm planning on going next, but one of the ideas that I've had is, what do I owe this local church? As a individual member, what are my obligations or responsibilities toward the local church that I am a part of? And one of those responsibilities is to support the church. That's not only monetarily, although that's part of it. I think we do have a responsibility to give when we are a part of a congregation, but there are other things. But I certainly think that fits within the responsibility that we have. And then, when we're discussing, this trend where people are starting to question the giving, the offering, and, collections and treasuries and such. Part of my question is, what's the motive behind that? Because I have a hard time believing it's purely, is this authorized kind of a discussion. I think it kind of goes back to that heart issue that we talked about earlier. There may be some kind of, heart issue that is underlying those desires to try and get rid of the collection. Like people who don't give, maybe they don't like feeling guilty when they're just passing the plate along, or when they're being skipped every week. I don't know. But my question is, what's the motive behind it? And I think sometimes people can hide under the guise of, well, I don't think it's authorized, but usually there's sometimes a lot more deeper issues at hand.
Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, if you can show that what you're doing is not authorized and that's okay, then I think one of the motives is, well, then we can do these other things that are not authorized, right? Sometimes we get caught up on the point that, oh, maybe we jump to the conclusion they want to get rid of the collection altogether, where you're right. The motive isn't getting rid of it. The motive is saying, no, it's okay to do it, but we're doing it without authority. We're misusing that. But since that's okay to do, then so are these other things. Instrumental music, for example. The role of women being changed is another example. And so there's all kinds of things they begin to introduce in that. So I think it may vary from one group or one person to another, but there's definitely a motive, I think, behind it, which is dangerous and why red flags should be going up for sure. Richard, what do you got for last thoughts today?
Well, I want to emphasize that just because you may think the church doesn't need your money, and maybe they do have quite a bit saved up. Number one, pray that the Lord gives you opportunities to use that money in his service. All right, pray for that. But, number two, notice how this actually happened. In 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 2, those things that were to be collected, and there was to be a storing those things up so that there wouldn't be any collections till Paul comes. So, I mean, there is a storing up, as you may think. Now we're talking about walking by faith, because just because at present you don't see a need to spend all the money, look what happens. Paul gives this command, and then he goes down, as you pointed out, Chris, was it 6 and 11?
Mm-hmm.
He gives them two opportunities. One was to send him on his way, and then Timothy on his way. And so right there, you get two opportunities that they didn't have before that they knew of to be able to use the Lord's money in his service. So remember, we walk by faith. And so just because we may not see a need to use the money today doesn't mean we don't know what's going to happen in the next hour. There may be a call that may come in, and that's why we need to be prepared for that service when the opportunity arises.
Josh, you got last thoughts?
Yeah, we had a comment that just came in. He came in at the end of what you were saying and said he was asking if you were saying that instrumental music is kind of a gateway drug to other things. It's not what he was saying. He was saying that there's an idea that if we are taking a collection and that's not authorized, it is, by the way, but they have come to the conclusion that the offering is not authorized and yet we're doing it anyway, and that's okay. That leads them to be able to open the door to other kinds of errors like instrumental music and such like that. And it's not just that. If you open the door toward error in one area, it then becomes a gateway to more, because sin begets sin. And so if you give an inch, then you can't consistently stop. It's a slippery slope. So anyway, as for my last thoughts, I would just say, what Paul said, God loves a cheerful giver in 2 Corinthians 9. So
Yeah. In Acts 20, verse 35, it's better more blessed to give than to receive. And again, it gets back to our heart, right? And that's what, rather than asking about, what God may need, is what do we want to do, and what do we want to do it for? And is our desire to, do the will of God and spread his gospel and make sure that it is possible for all of that to get done. And I think that's where our focus needs to be more than anything else. We appreciate everybody who tunes in, who comments, and shares the program out as well. Remember, you can always email us, bereanspirits@gmail.com, if you have an idea for a topic or something like that you want us to address, or questions about something that has been said that you would like for us to address further, we'll be happy to do that as well. Until next time, though, remember to search the scriptures with Berean Spirit.
Well, folks, that's all for today. Don't worry. Lord willing, the guys will be back next week for another Bible study on Berean spirits. Until then, let the guys hear from you. Drop them some email at bereanspirits@gmail.com. They'd love to hear from you. Until next time, let's keep studying that Bible.